Behold, my servant whom I uphold, my elect one, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the Gentiles.
Sing to the Lord a new song, and his praise from the ends of the earth. Let the wilderness and its cities lift up their voice. The villages that Kedar inhabits, let the inhabitants of Selah sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountains.
لبيك اللهم لبيك لبيك لا شريك لك لبيك.
Isaiah chapter 42 and 49 are additional prophecies that are connected to the messenger of the covenant, confirming key points regarding the mission of the prophet like Moses coming during the exile with a Torah, a covenant, a mishpat, which is judgment like Islamic law, restoring the remnant of Israel, restoring the temple, and bringing Gentiles such as Kedar, the Ishmaelites, into the true knowledge of God. Again, all this was fulfilled by the Prophet Muhammad. He is a lawgiver, and Isaiah 42 confirms he will bring the Gentiles, especially the Ishmaelites, into the knowledge of the true God, thus connecting it back to the great nation promise.
As for the servant of the Lord that was referenced in Isaiah 42 and 49, that cannot possibly be Muhammad for many reasons. First, as widely recognized by biblical scholars, based on internal evidence, the servant described in Isaiah 42 is the same servant described as in Isaiah 49, which we just heard. He's also described in the 50th chapter and 52:13 through 53:12. So according to these passages, the servant is actually identified with Israel, Isaiah 49:3, because he embodies the nation of Israel. Was Muhammad identified with Israel? No. Was he an Israelite? No. Did he embody the mission of Israel? No. Did he have a primary mission, as Yeshua did, to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, first and foremost, to regather them? No. Muhammad did not have that mission. Jesus did. But let's take this a little further. According to these prophecies, the servant would stand out a certain way. Would his message go as far as Kedar? Yeah, in other words, to distant lands. But if you go to 49, it says that it will go to Sinim, which according to traditional lexicons was China. Maybe it's a prophecy about Confucius. I mean, it's using the same logic to find Muhammad in 42, because Kedar is mentioned. You might as well make the prophet into Confucius. But we don't even have to be silly with arguments like this, because it tells us that this very servant would be beaten beyond recognition. He would die a violent death. Was Muhammad beaten beyond recognition? No. Did he die a violent death? No. Not only so, it says that he won't retaliate, that he'll lay down his life for those that oppose him. It even says that he won't even put out just a burning wick. He won't put out. Muhammad, according to tradition, was a mighty warrior, was a conqueror. He was not the lamb that laid down his life. He was not the one who died a violent death and rose from the dead. Yet according to these passages, Isaiah 42, Isaiah 49, Isaiah 50, Isaiah 52:13 to 53:12, these are descriptions of the servant. There's no ambiguity here whatsoever.
What are you going to do?
Reload.
This prophet is referred to as the messenger of the covenant in Isaiah chapter 42, Malachi chapter 3. Moreover, Isaiah chapter 42 tells you that he will be a lawgiver. Then he says the servant of the Lord can't be Muhammad because in Isaiah 53, the servant dies. Actually, Isaiah chapter 40 to 53 is speaking about two servants. It's speaking about the suffering servant, which is Israel, and then it's talking about a deliverer. And I'll give these passages. Moreover, even the Jews and many scholars don't take Isaiah 53 as speaking of the same person as Isaiah 42. And even the Targum interprets it in a way of the suffering Israel and a deliverer who they say is the Messiah, because that's there from Isaiah 40 to 53. Did he have a primary mission to Israel? Read Surah 2, ayah number 40. He came to renew the covenant with Israel. The servant would go to China. Well, guess what? The Muslims in the 7th century reached from the border of China to France. And wherever the servant's mission goes, the primary people who should come into the knowledge of God are the Ishmaelites. So who brought the Ishmaelites from idol worship? It was the Muslims. And Dr. Brown admits this in his book, which I can quote.
And as for Isaiah 42, 49, 50, and then 52:13 to 53:12, in point of fact, they speak of one and the same servant. The servant of 49 is rejected by his own people, yet becomes a light to his nation. That is the servant who is beaten by his own people in 50, who dies for his own people in 53, and rises from the dead. And who is that? Muhammad? No. Jesus, the Lord. Thank you.
All right, everyone, chill.
So Dr. Brown can tell us which servant of Isaiah 42 brought the Ishmaelites from idol worship. Please answer that. And I will quote a text from the Quran. You don't have to accept the Quran as the word of God, but as a 7th century document, you have to realize that it speaks about what's going on in Arabia. In the Quran, the pagan Arabs are boasting that is our God's better or is Jesus better. So much for a light to the Gentiles, which includes Ishmael.
As for Jesus bringing many Israelites to the faith, yeah, through history, thank God. Many have come to Jesus. In fact, probably more Muslims have come to faith in Jesus in the last 50 years than in the previous 1400. So wonderful things are happening, which is a great causing of rejoicing.
And Dr. Brown, he quoted Isaiah chapter 53 in the rebuttals. That servant has to come at the end of an exile or during an exile period, because Isaiah chapter 40 tells us Jerusalem's exile is about to end. So it cannot be Jesus, who was in the land at the time before the exile.
Now, regarding Dr. Brown's point that the servant of Isaiah 42 is the same as Isaiah 49, 50, and 53, and he said, I believe he said all the scholars say this, he's actually wrong on that.
As widely recognized by biblical scholars, based on internal evidence, the servant described in Isaiah 42 is the same servant described as in Isaiah 49, which we just heard. He's also described in the 50th chapter and 52:13 through 53:12.
Now, I agree, the servant of Isaiah 42 is the same as the servant of Isaiah 49. I agree with that, but it's not the same servant as Isaiah 53, because as I mentioned, there's two servants even in Isaiah 42, one who opens the eyes of the blind, one who's a deliverer who fights on behalf of the Lord. And then there's another servant that's blind and deaf and suffering in prison and in darkness. So that's referring to Bani Israel. So that's Isaiah 53, speaking about that servant who's suffering. But Isaiah 42 and 49 is speaking about the servant who's the deliverer. Now, to prove this as well, that they're not the same servant, look at this. The Jewish Study Bible mentions that the identification of the servant in Isaiah 42 is hotly debated. One of the possibilities includes Cyrus, who's a Gentile. And this was according to Saadia Gaon, who was a famous a Jewish rabbi who I think he was the first one to translate the Torah into Arabic. He's called Saadia al-Fayumi in Arabic sources, I think. Yeah, so he understood this as speaking about Cyrus, but the same Saadia Gaon understood Isaiah 53 as speaking about Jeremiah. So two different servants. Just to bring somebody more modern and academic, Joseph Blenkinsop, who Dr. Brown quotes in his own book, he suggests that Isaiah 42 might be speaking about Cyrus, but I guarantee you Blenkinsop ain't saying that Cyrus was the servant of Isaiah 53. So scholars don't agree that it's speaking about the same servant, all these chapters. Now, he said that the servant is identified as Israel in Isaiah chapter 49.
The servant is actually identified with Israel.
Many scholars, academic scholars, say that this was a gloss, like we say about Genesis 22, that Isaac's name was added to the text, where the text clearly says firstborn son or only begotten son. Isaiah 49:3, Howard M. Teeple writes, the term Israel in Isaiah 49:3 is a later gloss. And then he gives these reasons, like the Septuagint of Isaiah 42, they add Jacob and Israel to identify the servant in Isaiah 42. So they were adding names. And then he mentions other scholars who say that another reason that they know that the word Israel was added into the Isaiah 49:3 is because it breaks up the pattern of the Hebrew. It's odd. It breaks up he writes that the rhythm of the three strokes to each half verse is broken by the presence of the word Israel. So some Jewish scribe wanted to or understood this as speaking of the nation, and he added the word Israel into the verse. So the very word that Dr. Brown is trying to use to say that the servant must be Israel is doubted by many scholars. And verse 5 makes this clear, because this person is going to save Israel. So how can Israel save Israel? Is there more than one Israel? And by the way, just on that slide, they mentioned that there's also a Masoretic text, a manuscript that lacks the word Israel as well. It's a medieval one, but most of the Masoretic texts are quite late in dating. So there's manuscript evidence.
When you look, even the rabbinic commentators, and it's fascinating, people that don't know Jewish tradition, they'll believe this rabbi, but this rabbi often contradicts or ignores Jewish tradition, especially when it undermines his argument. So, for example, Radak, one of the so-called big three rabbinic commentators, he says the servant in Isaiah 42 is the Messiah. The Targum, which is the ancient Jewish translation paraphrase of the Hebrew Bible into Aramaic, it identifies the servant there as the Messiah. Or, for example, Isaiah 49 and 50, rabbinic commentaries say that's the prophet Isaiah himself, or prophets in general. And then there are many rabbinic traditions that say the servant in Isaiah 52, 13 through 15 is the Messiah.
Now, prepare for the shock.
So, in point of fact, you have rabbinic tradition saying Tovia Singer is wrong.
I said, prepare for the shock.
That there are two servants. That there are two servants. There is the nation Israel as a whole, and there is the Messiah, the servant of the Lord. As for Jesus bringing many Israelites to the faith, yeah, through history, thank God. Many have come to Jesus. In fact, probably more Muslims have come to faith in Jesus in the last 50 years than in the previous 1400. So wonderful things are happening, which is a great causing of rejoicing.
He's trying to get around the point of Islam bringing the Ishmaelites into the true knowledge of God. Now, we know they were steeped in idol worship. And when Islam came as a nation, they became monotheists, worshipped the one true God. And even Dr. Brown in his book calls Muslims staunch monotheists, and they've been ever since 14 centuries on monotheism. So that's not a fulfillment of Isaiah 42. But for Dr. Brown, a few Arabs becoming Christian here and there, that somehow justifies Jesus being the servant. So we show this much fulfillment for Islam, and he rejects that. But he shows this much fulfillment for Christianity, and somehow that means that Jesus fulfills it. Counter my point about Kedar coming into the true knowledge of God, Dr. Brown mentioned China.
Would his message go as far as Kedar? Yeah, in other words, to distant lands. But if you go to 49, it says that it will go to Sinim, which according to traditional lexicons was China.
So will there be a prophet like Confucius, for example? Because China is mentioned. But the thing is, the first thing is regarding Sinim, not every scholar understands that as speaking about China. Some understand that as about Egypt and other places. Nevertheless, the context is completely different to Isaiah 42. So Isaiah 42 speaks about Kedar praising the true God on mountains. In other words, coming into the true knowledge of God. That's not what this text says about China. Let's go with his interpretation, China. So Isaiah chapter 49, verse number 8 says that this servant will restore the land and to make them inherit the desolate heritages. So the children of Israel will be allowed back in the land because it was desolate. And then it goes on to say that basically the route will be cleared. Remember, prepared away in the desert in Isaiah 40. The obstacles will be removed, so the children of Israel that are exiled in the four corners of the earth, even as far as, let's go with these interpretation, China, they'll be able to come back to the land without being molested on the way. So that's what this is speaking about. Yeah. Now, this is what Moshe Gil, this is a Jew, by the way, writes on page 69. He's quoting a 9th century Jewish scholar by the name of Daniel al-Qamusi. This is what he says. For before he came, meaning Umar radiallahu anhu, they could not come to Jerusalem, meaning the Jews, they weren't allowed back in Jerusalem because of the Christians, and they would come from the four corners of the earth to Tiberias and Gaza to see the temple. So the Christians only allowed them to come once a year just to look at the ruined temple that was a garbage dump and cry. He goes on to say, but now with his coming, meaning Umar radiallahu anhu, he brought them to Jerusalem, meaning bringing the Israelites to Jerusalem, and gave them a place, and many of the Israelites settled there. And afterwards, people came from the four corners of the earth to Jerusalem to preach and pray. So he literally says that the Muslims allowed the Israelites back in the land, and they started coming from the four corners of the earth, and I'm sure China's part of the four corners of the earth. They came back into the land. So the very thing he tried to counteract us with is another proof that the Prophet, peace be upon him, is a servant of Isaiah 49. How many errors could I have exposed in one debate?